Welcome, friends and colleagues. To begin with, I'd like to provide an acknowledgement of country. I'm speaking today from the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Southeast Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and islands, dating back more than 60,000 years. And that sovereignty has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. Thank you. Last November, we ran our first CSL series topic. It was a well-attended session looking at the space and spatial ecosystems and space and spatial industry growth roadmap. Well, today is the second in our series. We're running this series purely in response to partner feedback. As such, it's a partner invite-only session aimed at providing you, our partners, with the opportunity to engage on topics that are relevant to you. So as such, at the end of the session, we'll be asking for a bit of feedback on how today has gone and, more importantly, what sessions you'd like to see in the future and your suggested topics. So today's topic is the role of government in fostering innovation. The session aims to explore some examples of how government innovates, to look at some of the challenges and to discuss learnings from some of our experiences. My view is that governments locally and globally have been under-recognised for the significant and transformative role in either enabling or leading innovation initiatives, which have resulted in fundamental changes in society and the way we work and act. There are numerous examples of this and the way in which government has underpinned innovation, from the well-known examples such as the moon landing, even through to more recent advances such as the iPhone and Tesla cars. And locally, we're seeing a raft of government service innovation now. The last 2 years have led to rapid digital transformation, and we're seeing the rise of government-led innovation through digital twins. So on to our session. I'd note there's a change in the agenda. Wayne Patterson was scheduled to speak, but his apology has been called to meet with his minister today at the same time as this session. So I think that's a reasonable excuse for him to step aside. Paul Seaton from Fugro has kindly stepped in, which is great because his organisation prides itself on innovation, and Paul brings a wealth of experience on this topic. So I look forward to hearing from him. Now to the speakers. The first speaker today is Marie Wilson, and Marie is currently the branch head of National Earth and Marine Observations at Geoscience Australia. So without further ado, I'll throw to Marie.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you for the welcome. I don't have any slides today, so you just get to listen to me talk. So when I was reflecting on the questions that Graham presented for us to consider around innovation in government and government's role in it, my first thought was similar to Graham's introduction, which was within government, we try and innovate all the time. We certainly have some successes, but like everything, we could be better. And then when you think about innovation between industry and government, my reaction to my thoughts on that was that quite often it's frustrating. So certainly industry feels like government isn't being as innovative as it could be. That industry in some cases are taking strides ahead of where government is. And they've got great ideas and solutions that they would like the government to pick up and run. On the flip side, government's a bit frustrated because it feels the industry doesn't understand the constraints that we operate under, and that some of the proposals are pushy, and it's seen as vendors or companies pushing their own agenda without really understanding what those constraints are in government. In the past, we've had success with programs such as the DEA Labs, which provided the opportunity for industry to engage with Digital Earth Australia and come up with business opportunities based on the technologies that have been provided. Within AGO, where I used to work, they ran the AGO Labs, which was a different focused labs project, which was about posing questions to industry, seeking assistance as to how industry might help to solve some problems within AGO. So my assessment of both of those cases, the DEA Labs and the AGO Labs, They had limited success, certainly. And obviously noting I haven't been at AGO for 12 months now, but I'd be happy to be corrected by anyone that is there. You know, the level of success that's been achieved by those programs could be better, and we need to continue to work on it. So grants such as were used by the DEA labs are no longer available to us due to changes in government policy. So we can't do that anymore. So now what? So thinking about what success is in innovation for us in government, really it's about outcomes that have been implemented and delivered. So that's not to say that we can't celebrate unsuccessful innovation activities, providing that we're embracing the lessons about what about them wasn't successful that we can reapply next time in our next innovation activities. But kind of back to the frustration bit, how can industry successfully pitch innovation without annoying agencies? How can government open up for engagement in innovation without surprising industry coming from left field? So when I was thinking about this, it comes down to my answer of partnerships. So partnerships require investment on both sides. From our perspective, from a government perspective, it's about being able to articulate those constraints that we have, that we're operating under. Often they're technological, sometimes they're policy, sometimes they're budgetary. Even just having us articulate those sometimes helps us to understand what they are as well. You know, why are we getting frustrated with an industry pitch? Because we can see that it's not going to work in our environment. How can we better partner and open up those lines of dialogue to better articulate what our restrictions are so that we can get better pitches from industry? Partnership also requires an equivalent investment from industry, from companies. You might not get return on your investment in a short time. So persistence is really necessary. Seems a bit ironic talking about innovation, but it is necessary. So one thing I reflected on was from my time at AGO. The outcomes of the AGO labs were great. The questions that were posed out to industry had some great answers, but there was no implementation plan about how those solutions could be included in workflows within the building. So money was provided from government to industry, a solution was provided back to government, and it wasn't implemented because the kind of next steps weren't really considered. Maybe the solution had technological requirements about it that just simply couldn't be met by the systems, or there was some sort of limiting factor. Whereas, if we can partner with industry, maybe we can adapt the solution to our technology constraints, or if adaptation to our internal technology could be possible to incorporate the solution. But those long-term partnerships are really the crux of the matter to make those implementations actually work. Looking from a DEA perspective, we're really looking to the future to partner to empower others to better utilise our technology. So what we need to do is work out how we need to improve our access to the technology to make it easier to use and to actually be what industry needs it to be, and not just us thinking that the innovations that we've done so far are going to be the end of the story. We need to continue to evolve what we're doing to support what industry needs. And to know what industry needs, we really need to partner with you to understand, what markets you're looking to move into, how we can provide better information in the way that you need it to be able to take that into those markets. From a DEA perspective, what we really want is to empower industry to go and take what we are providing and sell it. We want you to make money from it. We want you to develop new industries. We want you to bring Earth observation to new corners of the globe that we know it can provide benefit to, but we don't have the capacity of within ourselves to do it. So those partnerships are really the thing that's going to innovate us into greater uptake of our technology into the future. Yes, I think that's all I've got to say. Thanks, Graham. And I just would, I guess, come back to that frustration piece and hope that we can continue to work across government and across industry to really partner as we go forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Marie. I think you've posed a number of sort of challenges and questions that if people can take a note of that. We'll pick that up in the panel session later on. It's a really contemporary and frank view, and I thank you for your thoughts. Actually, a great intro to the session. I'm going to throw to Chris Hewitt now. Chris works for the Australian Space Agency, which is reasonably new in its formation, and it's about growing the sector, the global space sector in Australia to take to the world. And Chris, you have a role heading up industry, so really welcome your thoughts on what the future holds for you and the Space Agency. So now over to you.
Chris, if you could please unmute yourself, or if you're having trouble, let me know in the chat and I can support you with that. Thank you. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties, so perhaps we could move on to Claire and come back to Chris. Graham.
Sure thing. Okay, so let's hold Chris for the moment. Claire, I would like to hear from you. You play you're part of the partnerships team at RMIT, and as such, work closely with government on innovation and industry. So I'm really looking forward to your perspective. Over to you.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks for having me. And as always, agile and pivoting where necessary. Thanks, FrontierSI. I've got a few slides there as well, Paula. Thank you. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations and the land in which we operate. And RMIT conducts our business in collaboration. Pay my respects to the elders past and present. Very interesting questions posed already this morning around from Geoscience Australia, and particularly from my perspective, I have the privilege or the frustration of seeing it from multiple angles of what they call the triple helix of universities, industry and government. The key to innovation, in my view, is collaboration. And as Marissa Meyer once said, when you need to innovate, you also need to collaborate. I think in some instances, we're so busy running that we don't actually think about the co-design elements that do come together to create a better outcome, and also that focus on integration, which we've already heard today is so important. Next slide, please. The OECD Embracing Innovation in Government 2020 report and pointed to 3 key trends that I'd like to highlight today. The visible engagement of government in engaging on co-created solutions, opening doors and the intersections between sustainability and economic catalysts and bringing those two worlds together. And one of my favourite ones of a machine readable world, multidisciplinarity, and building together diversity, but also integrating ethics and decision-making, responsible decision-making into tools that we provide both to public servants, to the public and citizens at large. And particularly calling out, we've seen a lot of change and a lot of innovative responses to what we've faced over the last 2 years. Some of that has accelerated the change that would have taken and the adoption that would have taken years and years and decades to adopt. And I point you to the Observatory for the Public Sector Innovation that does actually pull together case studies of innovative COVID-19 responses, but also innovative government case studies as well, to draw out some of those fantastic examples that we've heard very briefly about from Graham and the team already today. Within the New South Wales Innovation Strategy, I keep this front and centre. We're having an East Coast focus at the moment with this presentation. The New South Wales Innovation Strategy and the Victorian Government Innovation Strategy released late last year point to the same thing. We've all got part of the story. How are we coming together to collaborate to solve the problems and the challenges and the opportunities as well that each of the states do face, and more specifically across Australia? Fostering that culture of collaboration through testing ideas, not always setting an agenda so well in advance. So at the core for me, collaboration and culture, and I'll move on to the next slide to talk further about some of the environment. We obviously see, we've just highlighted the innovation strategies for both New South Wales and Victoria as examples, and we see some of that incredible uplift and cultivation of the environment, particularly in South Australia as well. But what does that mean if we're not building in the right placemaking initiatives and activation activity to support it? Some really prime examples that I'd like to call out from both of these strategies, the New South Wales Hub strategy and likewise in Victoria, really anchoring all activity across the priority precinct strategy. And the Cremorne Digital Hub is a prime example of initiative, is a prime example of that. Obviously then these as staples have helped to foster a greater funding and innovation and commercialisation environment. And in Victoria, particularly the Breakthrough Victoria, the $2 billion investment fund, is supporting the sector, longer term sector planning and activation translation activity, which is also linked back to the precinct strategy. Again, calling out that if we don't have the right culture, the right collaborative environment and the right funding mechanisms and placemaking mechanisms, some of this is lost in our own prerogative. Next slide, please. Traction, I see is a really key part to any successful innovation, but also long-term engagement. What I've seen definitely over the last 10 years, particularly in Victoria, is a flailing across the long-term sector and innovation strategic directions. There's been some coming and going of sector strategies and definitely investment that's underpinned those. And also the fit for purpose connectors. And I see myself as very much one of those, but in a broader network. Without those long-term sector and innovation strategies, many are left without a clear direction and a purposeful engagement strategy, which then limits the investment and investment attraction, and also the partnerships become disjointed. From my perspective, the clear engagement points and co-design frameworks of the government, the mechanisms themselves are just as important as the initiatives. There's nothing like shopping around a great idea that we see, not specifically a technology idea, but a great idea that we see could add value, than having to knock on 20 doors. I need to be called up 2 years later to repitch the same concept. That being one of the frustration points from our side. A networked approach to solution design, and unpacking what I mean by that, is that we only all have part of the solution. There may be a need, a demand, but we need to be able to be open to who needs to come together to solve that and to leverage the capability that we do have. And a reflection on the last 5 to 10 years of innovation strategies throughout the state governments particularly. This can't be stop-start. We've seen a tsunami now of innovation plans and innovation activation activity and funds, which then put pressure unduly on already stretched industry and university sectors. Next slide, please. So what are some examples of connectors? And I've called out 2, which I think are really vital for consideration more broadly across Australia. Obviously, the ICN network based in each state play a significant role in that sector engagement, given so much of this is about SME engagement within the states as well. The role that they do play in linking the innovation strategy and funding strategies together and sector plans is crucial. The other example, the Waratah Research Network, is a New South Wales initiative which from the New South Wales government, which links all university capability together, and key prioritised impact-driven research activity that is either to be procured or is in supply. And it has become an essential part for each university in New South Wales, and also a really great way to give that visibility to the New South Wales government of what's hot and what is not. There's also teams like mine that I'm a part of, the RMIT Research Partnerships and Translation team at each university, and I can see some of my colleagues across the universities on the call today, who are conduits for capability, skills and resources. So again, those connectors forming part of the ingredients of the innovation environment. Next slide, please. And finally, capability and skills. There's no point us rolling out all of these fantastic initiatives without the upskilling of the public service to unlock not only the potential of the government, but of society itself. And by investing in this, we end up with a more collective and a collective capability uplift across the state and indeed the country, but particularly in sectors of need. There's some great examples of that, and two that I'll touch on shortly. The co-designing the skills and workforce development solutions in partnership with industry and government is the core of where a university's mindset is. As two, we all have a role to consider the fluidity of employment, and reflecting on my colleague's previous statement around almost like throwing the ball over the fence, and the integration. This actually helps with being in situ and being part of an organisation that you're providing that solution to. RMIT and other universities are definitely considering this, alongside the government, the federal government's announcement of the Industry Fellowships program, which goes some way of filling that exchange void. In terms of skills, and again, the co-design element, we can't do this alone, and nor should we be pumping out courses and skills without them being in need and validated by industry and the government to support innovation and uplift, capability uplift. A great example of this, where we've worked with government partners as well as industry itself, the Digital Health Skills Suite, which does provide a number of digital health short courses to support in situ training for health professionals, public servants and clinical care. And we've seen a fantastic uplift of that across the eastern states, but definitely now within the national setting. And that's been a collaboration between a CRC and two governments now, two state governments now, and about 17 industry partners that contributed to that. So in closing, the key takeaways from my perspective are the capability, collaboration, understanding that traction, and we're moving on, and the capability and skills component, which underpins everything that we're talking about today. Back to you, Graham, and looking forward to the rest of the session.
Thanks, Claire. You left us with some really salient points there on how to work, I guess, better between those three sectors. So thank you for your bringing some of your learnings over your experiences. That's great. Look forward to exploring a few more of those in the later session. I'm actually going to throw back to Chris Hewitt now. So Chris is on Adelaide time, so we just had a quick chat. He's now on Melbourne time, or should I say East Coast time. So thanks, Chris. I'll reintroduce you, but simply by saying that Chris has just been recently moved from a role in finance. Prior to that, he was in AGO, and now has a role in industry and space strategy at the Australian Space Agency. And so looking forward to hearing a little bit about what you see for the Space Agency going forward around fostering innovation and growing the space sector in Australia. So over to you, Chris.
All right, thank you, Graham. And look, my deepest, most humble apologies for committing the most rookie of errors and not updating my calendar to Adelaide time. Deep apologies for that. So just a few minutes on the insights that I guess I've gained in my short time at the agency. I joined in October. Insights on, I guess, federal government's role in fostering innovation. And I think it all begins with strong leadership and being very clear to the sector which areas they should be looking to engage or to invest in, and which areas will be useful to Australia over the very long term. If we go to the next slide, please. You are probably, and I hope that you are familiar with the 4 pillars of our current strategy: opening doors, increasing capability nationally, creating a responsible culture, and inspiring the workforce. And I really think this is the right place to start when we're talking about fostering innovation in an industry. The agency and government, federal government in particular, needs to set the right conditions for innovation to grow, to reach commercialisation, and eventually to become successful. And our 4 pillars seek to do this by orienting our industry to the international export market and getting our industry into the global supply chains, which is absolutely critical. We won't be able to sustain a space industry domestically alone. It needs to be internationally oriented from the very beginning. And our role is to open those doors, to create the partnerships that orient our industry to export opportunities, but also establish the mentoring relationships with the more mature industries overseas and the more mature players overseas, which really give us a leg up in being able to develop and deploy technology in Australia. And obviously, we are focused on building a national capability, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But it all has to be done within a responsible regulation environment, which is a really tricky balance. And federal government has such a critical, or has the critical role to play here, in that we want to foster innovation, but we need to make sure that it is done, that activities are done safely and in a way that maintains the social license that's so important, particularly for an activity like space. So the agency has recently invested significantly in its regulatory function, and I think that you can look forward to there being quite a bit of activity in this space to ensure that we have the right balance, the right ingredients for creating an environment where investment is rewarded. And the inspiration piece, the agency has such a significant role in helping the whole of our community understand the benefits of space, really taking space out of that niche area and mainstreaming it, and helping community understand that investment in space is not at the expense of investment in, say, for example, climate change. Actually, investment in space will help us achieve our net zero goals, and in that there is a career path for young STEM interested students now, and encouraging more people into the STEM workforce as we go forward. If we go to the next slide, thanks. So it's important that government identifies what are the technological priority areas, and we have done this, of course, through our civil space strategy, the 7 space priority areas, which are on your screen at the moment. And innovation needs to be guided by the reality of where government will invest and where there is need and capacity. And so if we go to the next slide, please. And of course, we have several programs that, having understood the priorities and communicated them, then competitively select capabilities within industry and seek to give them a leg up. And at the moment, our role in Australian industry has been very much focused on grants and assisting Australian small to medium enterprises develop their nascent technology and inserting it into global supply chains. The $150 million Moon to Mars initiative, under which the Trailblazer program will in fact put an Australian rover on the moon, is an excellent example of building international partnerships, establishing mentoring relationships, but also setting that inspiration piece. And what could be more inspiring than an Australian rover on the moon, effectively Australian footprints on the moon. Of course, last Friday, the Prime Minister announced the Access to Space program, and hopefully I'm sure that you saw that. It was very quickly enveloped by news out of the Ukraine, unfortunately, and rightly so. But he announced a $65 million program that would procure for Australian companies flight tickets to help Australian companies gain flight and space qualification, to be able to show that they have put their technologies into space and to be able to demonstrate space heritage. It's another critical role a government can play in reducing those barriers to entry. He also announced investment in spaceports. And most excitingly, and I'm not sure that this was picked up by every media outlet that I followed, but he announced the beginnings of negotiations for an astronaut program with international space agencies. So these targeted investments will be crucial in helping Australian industry and small to medium companies and the general community to get inspired about space, to recognise that it is possible to innovate in this area and to successfully commercialise, and to actually build satellites in Australia and launch them from Australia, and to build satellites in Australia and to take them into space, and eventually to become an Australian astronaut. And I think it's what's really exciting is that the first Australian astronaut, that is an Australian astronaut, not an Australian who was an astronaut with another under another nation's program, but the first Australian astronaut is alive today, and she's probably in primary school, and that's really exciting. Next slide, thanks. The other significant contribution that we can play in fostering innovation is, of course, helping the industry to understand itself and its capabilities, and providing depth to the priority areas. And of course, we're doing this through the technology roadmaps development, and 3 have been published so far: Earth observation, robotics and automation most recently, and about a year ago, communication technologies and services. And our analysis has shown that the communication technologies and services roadmap has leveraged about $100 million or so in funding into that area. This year, we will be publishing another 4 roadmaps, and the value these roadmaps bring to the industry is that they provide that all-important guidance as to where innovation should be focused, and where the government is looking to build capacity. So to sum up, the government's role in fostering innovation is first and foremost to set clear guidance and clear leadership as to where we are going in space, so that companies can then aim and understand where they can contribute to the broader picture. And then, having set those priorities, we do make targeted investments through grants programs and other mechanisms, but all of it being informed by a deep understanding of the industry's strengths and the opportunities that lay ahead of us. So thank you, Graham. That completes my presentation.
Thanks, Chris. I think that, I guess, overview of the blueprint for the Space Agency, detailing some of those initiatives you see that to address the priorities that you've identified. It's great to see where that's heading, and we look forward to sort of seeing it in action as it starts to grow. There's obviously some projects that are out and about at the moment, and a number that are coming through the mix and on the books. And you also actually highlighted another thing, and that's that obviously innovation needs people, and people need to be in the right roles to innovate. And so that inspiration piece that you underlined, which I think is has not been a focus as much in the past, is certainly critical to attracting people so that we do have that innovation capability here. So thanks for sort of highlighting that as well. I'll move on to the last speaker now, Paul Seaton from Fugro. So welcome back to Australia. I think you've spent a few years in Singapore over the COVID period, Paul, but now back in Brisbane and working well entrenched at Fugro. So look forward to hearing a little bit about your experience. That you can draw on from certainly some of the previous speakers. Fugro's been a part of Frontier for a very long time and has enacted in a number of innovation programs. So over to you for your experiences.
Okay, thanks very much, Graham, and everybody else for the opportunity to have a chat today. So I will share my screen now, if I may. I will briefly draw upon a project that we're currently involved in as an example of where innovation is being applied and encouraged by government. In some cases deliberately, in some cases unintentionally, but it's an interesting case nonetheless. For those who know Fugro, we're a large geodata company. We're involved in all sorts of domains. The one that I'm involved in most heavily is in the area of hydrography and coastal resilience. Our key project in Australia is one with the Australian Hydrographic Office, part of the Australian Geospatial Information Office, and specifically we're a panel member on the HydroScheme Industry Partnership Program. For those of you who aren't aware with the HydroScheme Industry Partnership Program, it was launched approximately 2 years ago, or it started about 2 years ago, launched by the Australian Hydrographic Office, which took what must be said is a very innovative approach to procurement. Rather than having ongoing small tenders, they put together a panel of participants who would be true partners with the government or the Hydrographic Office to deliver the requirement. And Australia's charting requirement, the survey requirement, capturing geodata in the marine environment is a very onerous one. The total area of interest, which Australia aims to survey and to understand and be able to use and manage better by 2050, is about 10% of the Earth's surface, 10 million square kilometres. So it's a Herculean task, and it's not one that can be done by any one company. How we became a part of this program really goes back to a much earlier innovation program, one that was a Defence Science and Technology Office program to develop a technology called airborne lidar bathymetry. That was a program that was rolled out more than 20 years ago. Fugro and Fugro's predecessors for the LADS operation in Adelaide in South Australia bought that technology and continued to work with the government in partnership on it. And how that worked was we had an ongoing program with the Navy to provide these services, and that program enabled us to invest money in continuing to develop the technology, to train people and to be able to meet the needs. As of today, we are the world's leader in this particular technology. And that was only possible because we had an enduring program with the government which enabled that funding and that sovereign capability to be maintained in Australia. In terms of being able to meet that task, the survey task that I mentioned earlier in the HIP program, it's going to require innovations. And because we have a client with an enduring program, we're able to invest and develop innovative solutions to help meet that requirement. Sometimes the government, as a client, asks for specific things, but where we find the innovations work best is when we're working close to the market. So we understand what's happening, we understand where the pain points are, where the opportunities are for efficiency gains, understanding our environment enables us to develop innovation programs and contribute to those. And we're doing that in a range of areas, using satellite technology to make the task easier, be it from providing imagery or satellite-derived bathymetry, the ongoing program with our airborne sensors, and some of the more new and very exciting ones with our vessel-based solutions, where we're rolling out autonomous vessels. The Blue Shadow is one in particular that was developed specifically for this program. Did the government specify it? No, it didn't. What the government said was we have a very large area that we need to survey, and it's going to be done over a 10-year period. So we were able to get together some of the leading people in our organisation and work out how best we might meet that requirement, and that program had rolled on. So in terms of just what this all means in the innovation process, one of the things I did want to point out is when we roll out something like an integrated solution, we talk about it as being a single product, something that's new and you know, rolls off the engineer's desks and can be applied immediately. It's far from that. If we look at the various technologies that we need just within the task, so we introduce an autonomous vessel, that in itself is dozens of innovation programs. How do we collect the data? How do we process the data? How do we communicate it? How do we control it? All of those require teams of engineers to develop solutions. The satellite imagery analysis, again, teams of engineers, not only to develop the products, but to put it into a format in which it can be used by the many other stakeholders, and then tying together the various programs that we have to it. So it is a very, very complex task. So I think one of the things that I'd really like to put forward here is, because it is so complex, things invariably go wrong. And that's one of the things that traditional government procurement processes don't handle very well. Government procurement traditionally, or in many areas, is one that focuses on having a best value solution in an open market where everyone can compete fairly. They want low risk solution. And then they might want some other things which are more intangible, and that might range from contributing to Australia's industry capability, which is a requirement of this program, but it's never really clear how to industry how these things are genuinely measured. Is it measured in the value of money that we put back in? Is it measured in the ongoing training programs, the development programs, which have a trickle-down effect amongst the various suppliers, and those sorts of things. So more often than not, the governments, be it at a local, state or federal level, have very conservative procurement processes, which really do struggle with the innovation process. Because when we innovate, because we're doing very complex things, things go wrong. And that means when you develop something for a solution for government or for a client, and you introduce it the first time, there will be teething issues. And we certainly experience that with a number of the projects that we have. And I think that's one of the great challenges, one of the things which is not immediately clear to government that, or to any customer, that if you want innovation and you're going to specify innovation, I think you need to deliberately buy that innovation, have a separate program, have a level of understanding on how you're going to judge and treat these things as you roll them out. So in terms of, and I'm talking very quickly here just so I can get through this and explain a bit more and show you how it worked. We recently rolled out many of these innovations for a project. We used our shallow water airborne bathymetry system. We integrated that with a deeper system, the one that was developed in partnership with the Royal Australian Navy and the DSTO. We went and used some traditional methods for multi-beam for infill, but we also used unmanned survey vessels and integrated that. Then we all had to tie that together with various images, but put it in a format, in a context in which it could be delivered to the customer. And there was another innovation there, the digitalization of all of these different inputs and being able to deliver it to people that can use it. So why is that special? And it's special because when we're innovating, we're not simply developing a new tool, a new piece of software, a new technology. We're actually developing new entire ecosystems. They're complex ecosystems that you have to look at as a whole. So we have the unmanned surface vessels, but they've got to be managed somehow. How do we do that? We will do it with a remote operations centre. Fugro's done that. And it was really nice listening to the space program and what the Australian government's doing with that, because that's an example where a technology that was developed for the marine environment, for us to be able to manage our vessels remotely and have people out of the way, so that it's safer, it's cheaper, it's got a lower environmental footprint. That technology and that system, those communication tools, or the many communication tools that go into that, is now being applied to the space program. And quite ironically, that is the only example that we have in Fuga at the moment where we have an innovation program that is specifically an innovation program, and it's co-funded by the Australian Space Agency. But then there's many other things, that the data delivery and processing, we have to introduce new ways of doing it, the operation models, how we work, how we think about things, how we think about procedures, they have to be rewritten. And we've also got the workforce, the training of that. These are things that, yes, we can do as companies or clients to government, but ultimately we need a strong partnership, a partnership between the government, the long enduring programs, between education institutions, to make sure that we have the right people coming through in the future with the right skill sets that we have. It's a very, very broad approach, and it's one that only really does work well as a partnership. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is the innovation program that exists within organisations is one that is best done in a very engineered sense. It's a deliberate thing. So we have that bottom-down approach, or the bottom-up approach, where we have the identification of needs. We want to do things. We can develop a proof of concept, but then you have to design the minimal viable product and that path to taking that to market. So these are evolutionary programs, and a quick innovation program might be 1 or 2 years, but more often than not, these are programs that 3, 4, 5 years in length before you have a product that can be globalized or taken to the market and shared and has been proven. So procurement processes, by and large, need to reflect that. So if it is an innovation program that you want, I think the government has got really 2 things that they can do for industry to make industry work. 1, make the investments enduring, or 2, make the investment very specific. That is, pay for the innovation itself and fund it. There are many innovations that industry will develop, and many of them are successful because we understand the market and we have a need for it, and we will try to work it ourselves. But if we're talking about what role the government has to play, that's a key one. There's a couple other observations that I'd quickly make. When we talk about government, when you sit in industry and people talk about government, you like to think of it as a single organisation, but of course it's not. The government is really a body that captures many different organisations at various levels. And with the work that we do, a very clear problem that we have is there's a delineation in jurisdictions in the Australian marketplace. So, for example, the Australian Hydrographic Office is responsible for the nautical charting of Australia. So that's typically the deep water, the areas that are 3 miles from the coast. Beyond that, or coming back towards shore, they're areas that sit within state jurisdictions. So a lot of the technologies that we develop and have used don't necessarily translate across those various levels of governments easily, and not having clear communication, common strategies at a state and federal level introduces ranges of complexities for organisations wanting to develop solutions, and it certainly holds back the development of innovations which would make enormous contributions to things like managing the environment and the coastline and how people live. And then sometimes we see disputes between levels of government. So is it a local government that should fund this work, or is it a state, or is it a federal matter? That's something that we see quite regularly. But if I was going to sort of give a final takeaway before we enter into the roundtable discussion, it would be that where innovation has worked best for us is when we have a true partnership, as is the case with the HIP program. It's a long-term program. We understand the client's needs, in our case, the government's needs, because it's a long-term program. It's an innovative approach to procurement because they've laid all that out and they've given us an opportunity to invest, but they also participate in the work that we do. So they put client reps on board and embed people in projects so we can communicate and understand each other at a much better level. It really is that communication, that understanding, that long-term certainty which will underpin the best innovation programs. So with that, I'll pass it back to yourself, Graham, and then we can chat about some of the issues.
Thanks, Paul. I think, yeah, thanks for your summary and for that use case example of HIP, which is a really great one. Is you sort of highlighted the long-term co-investment and the commitment, the continual R&D and I over that time frame as well, because there's been quite a lot of change since sort of day one on LADS. And then also that enduring funding piece and I guess market requirements. So thank you for that great example. I think that's a nice bookend to where Marie started. And so without further ado, I'm going to throw to Jill, who is Dr. Gillian Sparks, the Chair of FrontierSI, and also the Victorian Commissioner for the Environment. Jill and I have spoken numerous times about innovation. It's a key part of FrontierSI's brief. And I know she's super passionate about innovation, not only with Frontier, but all her other work as well. So without further ado, Jill, thank you to the speakers and over to you.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks to the speakers for setting up such a wonderful panel. The great thing listening to you all was besides your incredible expertise and passion, was there's a constant theme here. You're all really saying the same things and the similar things, which makes us feel very good, because we know that if we know what to do and we all do it a bit, we're actually getting there. There's really no daylight really between what you're seeing, I think, and that's fantastic. So I wanted to start first by just stepping up a bit to an opening quote from someone who I really admire, and if you haven't read her work, I do recommend Mariana Mazzucato. I'm sure most of you are probably across this, but in her book, The Entrepreneurial State, Marianne says the standard narrative about government, and she's talking about in the US, but it's broader, is that it stifles innovation, whereas the truth is that it enables innovation at a depth that business cannot reach, and the entire society, including business, gains as a result. And we have to change the way we think about the role of government in fostering innovation. I'm a deep and passionate believer of Marianne's concepts here. I've seen it through my life that there is a really important role of government in fostering innovation, and we've heard it from all of you. So I'm now going to pose a few questions and weave in some of the great chat that we heard from the panel. I might start by posing a question to Marie first, going right back to your comment, Marie, which I just thought nailed it and probably links to the procurement piece too. How can industry successfully pitch to government without being annoying? Which I thought was just a really sensible way of framing that. And how can government innovate without surprising and inspiring? You've been involved with the Digital Earth Australia, and that's now established infrastructure. How did that get up off the ground, and what were the lessons there around procurement, not annoying, collaborating, partnerships?
Thanks, Gillian. It's quite interesting actually, because one of my directors told me just recently that he doesn't get to have fun anymore. And I think that kind of talks to it. DEA certainly was funded through Vision. It was quite a bit of industry partnership, but it was really heavily driven through GA staff to government. You know, approaching government is a bit hit and miss, as I'm sure most of you are aware. That particular one, they were able to convince the government of the day on the value of investing in Earth observations technology to bring it forward. And certainly the program started, you know, exceedingly, you know, innovatively, you know, really building on things like the Open Data Cube and the science that we're able to build on top of that to provide products out to our users. So certainly started off from a really innovative place. Unfortunately, I think my team would say unfortunately, you know, where we're at now is we now need to deliver that as an ongoing government program. So we don't have the resources to innovate all the time. We need to focus on making sure that what we're delivering is, you know, repeatable and stable and all of those things that our users expect from a government platform. So a lot of our effort goes into that, and our ability to innovate is less, because with a finite number of resources, time is the thing that we really need to be able to explore those innovative ideas that we've got that we kind of don't have time to do. So that's kind of where I was getting to with my partnership kind of discussion before. We can't do everything. We are very aware of all the things that we would love to do. I talk about it all the time with the team. There are all the things that we could do. There are so many things we could do. We need to focus on the things we should do, and then how do we partner with others to, explore those options on the could do. So where we don't have the capacity to take them on, how can we empower others to learn about that technology and go and sell, this wonderful thing out into broader industry where we just don't have the capacity to do so.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you talk about not being able to do everything you want, and obviously needing to deliver the policies of government and needing the time, obviously the resources, but I would say in this space, the resilience and the passion and the vision, because we do rely on public servants sometimes to hold a vision and a passion through different periods, so that we can, put something on ice for a little while and reboot it and keep it going. And Claire talked about upskilling the public servants to unlock the potential of government. And of course, the public service is not one thing, it's it's a big thing. So it sort of links to this idea that we need a upskilled but also resilient and passionate public service that's able to do it. And I wondered, Claire, from your experience, have you seen jurisdictions where this is done best? And also, you talked, the examples you gave, there's quite a bit of examples of line agencies delivering their programs, but the role of central agency, Department of Premier or Department of Prime Minister and Treasury, can you talk a bit more about the upskilling idea that you've got there?
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. There are some prime examples, particularly I would say within the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning that you know well as Sustainability Victoria Agency and EPA Victoria, that are very, EPA particularly, are quite introspective of what skill they have and what they don't have and what value it would add to have it in-house. So speaking quite generally here, being a science broker and analyst, adding greater communication skill to their capabilities so they can adapt to the changing regulatory environment as well, and become the communicators of and community engagement facilitators too. In a more technical sense, we've seen great strides with the Department of Premier and Cabinet, particularly out of the commissions, the Domestic Violence Commission and the new Department of Families and Social Services as well, approaching how they collaborate on a broad agenda by knowing who they are, who they have in their circles as well, from a capability sense. So drawing that capability in, and there's been a great interest and a great enthusiasm and motivation to support not a reskilling. It's not about reskilling, but to support a digitalisation skill or particular upskill that will add greater difference to the strategic direction and policy direction of the department.
Yeah, that's great. Well, being the Commissioner for Environment in Victoria, really nice to hear that our agencies are leading the way in some of this, but a great contribution. Chris, you said, speaking of environment, you said something that made my heart sing. Space will help us deliver our net zero emissions target. It's not about taking the money that would go elsewhere. It's actually about building a capability that's at the core of what we need to do to transition the economy and adapt to climate change, which is completely off my hymn sheet. As you know, I'm very passionate about the space and spatial sector and the role it will have to play in transition to net zero and climate adaptation. So how do you think that we can continue to innovate and drive growth along that line? Like, what is the role of space here? It's about transitioning the economy. It's a big agenda, and that should mean there's lots of opportunity to foster innovation and growth and jobs. What's your vision around that, and how do you see that coming, playing out over the next decade?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. There are several big challenges that every economy will be facing over the next couple of decades. Hitting net zero by 2050 is one of them. Obviously, that's combined with the decarbonisation agenda, and as has become very clear in the last couple of weeks, but we've been observing it for years now, I guess, the increasingly uncertain geopolitical environment that we're entering. And I think in the space industry, it's about aligning our narrative to those big issues and big challenges. In my experience, innovation happens when there's a problem to solve, a challenge to solve, not a task to be done. And Paul basically described that in the HIT program really well, that it's a partnership. The client didn't give them a task, they gave them a problem, and then left it up to Fugro and the other panel members to solve that problem. So if we're able to shape the narrative around space as solving the big problems of our age, decarbonisation, geopolitical uncertainty, growing populations, then that will inspire people. It will also help people understand why space is of benefit to them. So it will help. It'll help with the social license, and it just is a more creative way of engaging a problem, rather than saying we need a series of technologies that will deliver this solution. And I've seen this at a small scale and at a large scale in government. Government has a real ability to set challenges and to invite companies to solve them, and then to fund those solutions and bring them a couple steps up the TRL ladder, and then once again revisit the challenge. And government without deep pockets can do that. So to my mind, that is probably that would be the best approach that we can take as a government. And it gets back to what I was talking about in my very short presentation. Government has the role of leading and setting goals and setting a narrative that everybody can ascribe to and can get behind and be inspired by. But then, of course, we need to back that up with some actual cash to ensure that it's not all on the private sector to deliver.
That's true. And what we're hearing from our panel and looking at the chat is not only do we need cash, we need, now I think it was Claire that said this, we need the mechanisms to procure, like how do we, so one of the tangential questions to that then, and you said you started in October, so you're only new in the seat, and I know that you're focused on growing the Australian industry through investment, workforce development. So if we get down to the doing, is the Australian Space Agency as a major opportunity to lead innovation and foster innovation and growth of the economy, setting itself up for the sorts of procurement challenges we've talked about, the risk-taking ability to fail on things, partnering with unis, that type of thing? Are you getting set up from the get-go that way so that we can see this come to fruition?
I think the short answer is yes, we absolutely believe that procurement is part of our future, and that there is a role for government in establishing, that baseline of demand that enables the sector as a whole to be able to plan in the long term. But in doing it in such a way, of course, that it is only the baseline, and the rest of the sector must still be focused on the broader commercial opportunities, especially the export opportunities. And it's on them to find those and to commercialize them. But no, at the agency, we absolutely believe that there is a role for the agency in procurement and playing a active role in the industry.
Yeah, thank you. And Paul, you know, your example was just fantastic to actually see what you are doing through a great partnership in the industry partnership program. So specifically, what have you seen? What are the attributes of that partnership? And you talked a bit about them, but talk us a little bit more at a more granular level about the attributes of the partnership that are really leading to the success. And also, I know Paula wanted us all to just try and touch on the procurement piece, because at the end of the day, you had to get started, and starting is really important.
Yeah, no, starting is important, and procurement was key to it. So what the program did for us was it articulated very clearly what the need was of the government, of the community, and it made clear also that there would be funding available to cover the expense of doing the task. So it gave us the challenge and the resources to get started doing it. Has it been a smooth start for us? It hasn't been without its challenges. So I'll just sort of touch upon a couple of those. The program is new for everybody. So both the Hydrographic Office had to put their procedures in place and the resources in place to be able to handle all the data coming in and to be able to manage it. They had to work out processes to plan for the work. And then they had to work out how to best distribute that amongst the various panel members. So that created an ongoing level of competition within the panel itself. And in the process of being in that panel, we started to understand better the measures in which procurement decisions were being made. And if you, in that particular panel, you've got to have very high quality of data being produced. It's got to be best value for the Commonwealth and low risk. And as I mentioned before, some of our innovation programs may not necessarily fall into the low risk category. Indeed, many of our best innovations don't. So what we had to do is communicate that and get to know the government's requirements, and they also had to get to know how these innovation programs worked and experience that there would be periods or moments where there would be failure, but rather than punishing failure, it needs to be celebrated. So you want to fail often and quickly in that evolutionary innovation process to get to a robust product that moves and is ongoing. I think there's a few other things that could probably be areas where there can be more work done together, and there are things that we're learning together. For example, regulations and other sort of standards and issues like that. So we may be surveying in one area where the Commonwealth believes it has jurisdiction, but it actually crosses into marine parks that are a state jurisdiction. So there's unexpected stakeholders and additional levels of communication which are sometimes required. So it's the Australian operating environment can be quite complex. When we're introducing new technologies like the unmanned surface vehicles, the regulations have to be in place to be able to operate those. AMSA, the Maritime Safety Authority, they need to be part of that process and sign off it and approve it. I think there's other issues as well, and we talk about the need for training of government personnel or government agencies. And one of the areas where we see this quite often is in areas like AI and cloud processing of data and delivering it. Often governments aren't able to adjust regulations fast enough to keep up with the pace of change within industry. By the time things have been analysed and a policy is put in place, particularly when you're dealing with departments like the Department of Defence, they move at a pace which just can't keep up with some of those innovative changes. So that's a real challenge for everybody, as is training people and having people in situ that understand these new technologies and the way things are done. It's hard enough being the innovator and developing these things, which is new, and then developing training programs and sharing the information with the education, our education partners and other parts of the industry, as well as the government, so that everyone can maximise the most out of these things. I think the other thing which we sometimes see too is a lot of the value add, the paybacks, the things that are delivered in the Australian national interest or sort of broader interest don't necessarily translate into how procurement decisions are made and rewarded. And I'll give you a very simple example. Using the technology that we developed in Australia and have used, and the software and the cloud processing and all those other things that go with it, we surveyed the nation of Tuvalu. So that's we're talking about the climate challenge. That's one of our Pacific partners, one of our neighbouring countries that is most vulnerable to climate change, which didn't know in real terms what their land height was. It was just guesstimates. And we gave them a survey which took them from the edge of the reef over the entire nation. And that data is then being used by that country to change all of their infrastructure and engineering programs over the next couple of years. So if that's not part of Team Australia and looking after our regional partners, then I'm not too sure how you describe it. I think it's a wonderful example, and there are so many examples out there of innovations which are developed in Australia and are then used within our region, within our trading partners, that have ongoing benefits for relationships and the life and the well-being of much broader communities than just the local ones that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Paul. You've got a wealth of examples. I think we could listen to you for hours on all your examples, and I love what Marie said, though, just reminding us as well that mutual understanding of the systems that we're all working in and the constraints that we all have is really important. And one of the interesting challenges will be for all of us as the Space Agency and Digital Earth Australia, big things keep going. What's changing for government? Because we talk about government as though it's this static thing that just sits there. Well, it's actually not. And it's got a lot of priorities. It's supporting a lot of effort in a lot of areas, and the need to prioritise for the whole community is really important. So it'll be interesting to see how public servants continue to define and redefine the role of governments. And the AGO lab, there's a lot of chat about the AGO labs, Marie, and the work that was done there to engage with industry and academia to explore ideas and foster innovation and help develop, I guess, understanding of what the constraints are. How did that mechanism work for you?
I'm happy to answer, but it might be worth talking to Chloe if we're able to, because she was the one that ran the project sort of internally. I was one of the business users on the AGO side. And again, the solution that was kind of provided to support my area, which was around some change detection algorithms, for example, was really heavily based on internet-based data sources and things like that. And in the kinds of environments that AGO is working in, a lot of the time internet-based sources aren't something that we can use within systems and things like that. So there's a disconnect between potentially where data is coming in and when I need it. So yeah. Those are kind of the challenges that I refer to. But yeah, so I think
for this session, we might just put a note, Paula, that it might be good to have Chloe talk about this at another session, because we won't give it the time it would warrant. But I guess just the concept that government have set this lab up, if you like, really demonstrates that there is an understanding of some of the things we're talking about, fostering innovation through collaboration, partnerships, mutual understanding and respect of what our constraints are. We're getting towards the end of the session, and I wanted to have the opportunity to ask you one, if you're Prime Minister for a day question. I might not frame it that way for you, Marie and Chris, but I might start with Claire and just ask you, you were the Prime Minister for a day, what would be the one thing you would do to improve or change the way we foster innovation in Australia and the role of government in that, to improve the role of government?
I'll park the facetious comments, Jill, about having a minister that stays in for longer than 6 months. But if I was Prime Minister for a day, I would make sure there is connectivity between the programs that are there to support SMEs to scale and grow, and ensure that there are the right supply chain incentives to do so. It's a huge issue we see constantly of SMEs, particularly who have the great tech that don't have the relationship or the supply chain access at the same time as SMEs in Australia making up most of our industry. So how we actually connect the dots between the innovation programs and the funding programs within the procurement environment as well, I think would be a massive improvement.
Great, thanks for that. I should say I'm on the board. I'm a board member of ICN in Victoria, and it's got a really important role with the procurement. So maybe there's some infrastructure that we could build on there. Chris, you are doing this. So rather than asking you what could the Prime Minister do, what are you doing? Because you told us that this is all happening through the space. This is the great big innovation, and it's all set up perfectly for what we need. Tell us what's the one thing you're working on to make sure you just get it right now?
We are doing an industry capacity, understanding industry activity, so that in setting those goals and priorities, and in time designing programs, we hope we're not doing it in a vacuum, pun intended, but we're doing it conscious of industry's capacity to deliver. So any kind of innovation intent or innovation ideal from government must be rooted in the reality of where industry is actually at, so that we can design it properly, so that it's not too big a step. In fact, it's a series of quite manageable and doable steps for industry, but still a stretch. Yeah, clearly I'm describing a fine balance here, which is hard to get. And the only way we'll get it is by understanding industry properly. So we're actually investing in a dedicated team at the moment to gather data, economic data, so that we can understand industry much better than we do now. And in fact, we'll make that data all publicly available. So it'll help industry understand itself. And what we're hoping is that it will help in future investment. So as investors look at the Australian space industry and they're wondering what's its trajectory, where are the gaps and so forth, they'll be able to come to the agency and gather that data and help them make really informed investment decisions. So,
Right.
Good policy begins with good data, and so does good investment.
Fantastic, and you're already addressing some of Claire's concerns. I'm going to throw to you last, Marie, because you're in a very well-established business that's leading the charge on a lot of stuff. But Paul, just in 30 seconds, if you're Prime Minister for the day, you've given us lots of tips. What's the one thing you would do?
So that's a very difficult question to answer in one thing, so I'm going to be cheeky and I'll throw a few things back at you very quickly, Gillian. The first thing I'll do is value the intangible. So there's a lot of things that are being delivered through innovation and technology that just aren't valued. So in a procurement process, for example, if we introduce something that lowers the carbon footprint, that doesn't have a price set against it on the evaluation process. So it still goes against what is the price and what's delivered. So value the intangibles and get that out there, so that make sure we've got to buy the innovation. It's the number one thing the government can do. It's a lead customer. Let industry find the solutions, let the market find the solutions, but you've got to provide the marketplace to allow that to happen. Fund and encourage more collaboration. and support consortiums. Organisations, venues like this are critical for us to work together. There's very few opportunities that we genuinely have to come together and share and brainstorm and come up with programs, initiatives. So value consortiums and be more responsive on the regulatory side of things. You've got to keep pace with the change of technology and the way in which many government agencies operate, are funded and trained now makes it a very difficult task for them.
Great, thank you. And Marie, I actually wanted to know what you're actually doing, because I know you're doing a lot, but also if I can go to the DEA program, what's the sort of thing you're doing to make sure we really stimulate industry innovation and growth from that investment? Where's your focus?
So innovation for us comes across all levels. So we need to innovate in our platforms, for example. So we need to make sure that, how we're handling our petabytes of data, is as forward-leaning as we can. So we're working closely with our providers on the tech side, so the Amazons and the Microsoft, etc. What are they innovating? Where can we work with them to figure out how we can continue to, move this amount of data around and give the best service to our customers? We are innovating on our science. So we're already providing a number of products out there for our users. Some of them we call quite foundational. We've just released a new land cover product, for example, which gives that nationally consistent scale. That's our role. We need to provide that nationally consistent data. How can we continue to innovate in the product space to do more on mangroves, more on seagrasses, really moving into solving some of the blue carbon questions and things like that. So that's another innovation piece. But I think probably the thing that's probably most applicable to this audience is that how do we innovate with partners? Because as I said before, we know that the financial sector could really use Earth observation to support what they do. We know the urban planning sector can use Earth observation to support what they do. We don't have the capacity to really reach into those markets and really show the power of what Earth Obs can do. So that's the innovation piece that we need to continue to build with our partners, probably over the next 12 months or so. We're not really there yet. We're sort of setting ourselves up, as I said, in the stability side right now, but we just have to do that because we can't. And we really want to, because like everyone, we can see the true value in what we can offer. And it's how we can get that out there and innovate different ways on doing that.
That's fantastic. And it's great, actually, great way to finish the panel with this Connect, Share and Learn Roundtable and understanding the role of this community of practice, which is the Frontier Partners. We're very committed to the partnership model and the idea that together we can all achieve more, and we really do need to foster innovation and collaborate and do it with partners and help each other. So hopefully a few people have heard what you've said and will start thinking about their networks and the things that they can do to help you. But just to sum up, I think one of the key things that we heard about the role of government in fostering innovation was to set clear guidance and show some really strong leadership on where are we heading. So industry will rally around if they know where you're going, and be in there for the long haul, have the right processes and mechanisms in place, both around procurement, but also within your public service so that they're on the journey too and they're upskilling as required. Set the priorities, fund the priorities, and make sure that it's evidence-based decisions on supporting the growth in the right area. What industries do we have? Where are the SMEs? Where are the unis heading? And bring the whole system together, as Claire said. So, so much for your time. I'm going to throw back to Graham to close, but it was just wonderful to listen to you all and to, again, hear what you're doing. Congratulations on the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for your leadership.
Thanks, Jill. And firstly, thank you for spending some time to run the panel and to think about the panel and share your thoughts on innovation as well, Jill. I'd like to again thank the speakers, Marie, Claire, Paul and Chris. It was excellent, your thoughts and input and discussion have been invaluable. I thought it was a really high quality session. I want to thank the team that pulled this together. It was a lot of work behind the scenes, in particular Paula, Nick and Roshni, for all your efforts. Anyone else I've missed, I apologise to, but thank you. It's been a great effort from the FrontierSI team. We'll be making this available as a link. We'll tidy it up and send it out to you so that you can share it with your partners, your internal teams, if you'd like to reflect on some of the thoughts. And lastly, I would like to say we'll send out a link, as I mentioned at the start of the session, for you to provide some feedback on future sessions. As I said earlier, we run this for our partners to stimulate thought and on innovation and research. So we're looking for future topics. Please provide some feedback on that. Thank you for your time, everybody, over your lunch hour in particular, and all the best for the week ahead. I'll close it there, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.